Hello, everybody. We're just in the process of admitting a whole bunch of participants. I think this will be maybe the largest number of in-person participation in our virtual meeting webinar that we've had. So thank you for registering. Thank you for being here. Would you please put your name and the friends group that you are affiliated with in the chat box so we know who we have here. And also, as we go through the webinar, if you have questions, if you can type them in the chat box, that works great. If you aren't able to do that, we'll try to save some time for vocal questions at the end where you can just talk about it. But if you'll put it in the chat, we can get to it as we go along. Hi, Marguerite. I see your picture there. I haven't seen you for forever. Sorry. Okay, I think we've got everybody in, so let's go ahead and get started. We have a couple of announcements first, and first of all, thank you and welcome to everybody if you missed my welcome earlier. We have a couple of quick announcements. Joan, do you want to do yours first, please?
Sure. The webinar for March is going to be an introduction of our revised website, which we have just sort of dubbed it as the hub. And the great thing about this site that one of our board members, Dustin Brandon, created is that within it, there's going to be forums. So like say Region 5 can have its own forum, so friends within that region can talk. It will be broken up into different types of forums. So we are going through the final testing on this. And on March 12th at 2 o'clock, Dustin will be going through the website and showing off to everybody. He has made it super easy to use and also provided within the site instructions on how to do things. But it's really going to be a place for us to connect with each other, to unify, and to help us move forward. And for those folks who are not fans of Facebook, this would be definitely the site for you. So once again, we'll be sending that information out, but the webinar announcing this great new website will be March 12th at 2 p.m. in Eastern time. Okay, on to you, Cheryl.
All right, thank you, Joan. And Tom, do you want to tell a little bit about what we've been doing for advocacy?
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is Tom Worthington. I'm with the Minnesota Valley Refuge Friends. So Corfa and the Refuge Association are keenly interested in helping friends groups around the country be more successful with their advocacy efforts. We're working on new and effective messaging and graphics to help package useful information that you can use in a kind of a toolkit format. We're also developing regional networks of friends, members. We believe that by working together, our collective voices can perhaps be more powerful with our senators and our representatives. So if you or anyone in your friends group has an interest in joining this kind of collective effort for advocacy, kind of a regional collective, please make a note in the chat box of your interest in the advocacy teams and include your contact information. We're just getting started on this, but I think it could be pretty powerful. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And now I get to do the introduction of, you always hear about a person who needs no introduction. Well, today our webinar presenter is someone who needs no introduction to this group. Desirée Sorenson-Groves recently rejoined National Wildlife Refuge Association, this time as their CEO and president. And I've always said she has her finger on the pulse of the hill. She knows what's going on, and she's here to let us know what's going on. Again, if you have questions, please type them in the chat, or at the end, we'll try to save a little bit of time for questions. Desirée, with no further ado, it's all up to you.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thanks for everyone for joining us. It is so great to see all the names in the chat and the faces. A lot of us, we've been working on refuge stuff together for a really long time. So I really am happy to see all you guys on here. I'm going to have Eden share her screen so that I can also monitor the chat. And so if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. And to all my former Fish and Wildlife Service colleagues like Tom, Mark Musaeus, Jan, Howard, any of you guys, if there's something that I'm missing or if there's something that you want to say, please just put it in the chat or interrupt me. I'm totally fine with that, as you guys know. But this, we scheduled this webinar a long time ago to do a congressional outlook for the Congress and the administration and sort of what's going on. It's extremely timely, obviously, with everything that is happening. So I'm going to give a little quick overview to set things, and then I am going to get obviously into the recent firings and what Friends can do to help. But I do want to set the tone to understand a little bit why all this stuff is happening. I think most people know, but I'm going to try to put it all in some context. So Eden, next slide. Obviously, you all know that the GOP controls the White House and Congress. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about their priorities and their expectations to set the tone of where we're going. Next slide. The executive branch, as we knew, they came out with a lot of different executive orders on day one. Executive orders are from the White House, and then there are secretarial orders from the Secretary of Interior, and there are directives from the Fish and Wildlife Service Director. We knew, this is nothing surprising, that energy is going to be a high priority for this administration. They've said it since they were running for office. So Arctic refuge drilling for sure, and more on public lands, opening more lands and waters to extraction. There is drilling on many refuges. I see that there are people on this call from places that have drilling, like in Louisiana. That has happened throughout the refuge system at different times. But I think that there could be a threat that you could do more in budget reconciliation. I will get to that. It's nothing that we have to worry about until it happens. But if it happens, we need to have an all-out response to it. More recreation, like hunting and fishing. Again, there's nothing shocking here. Having more hunting on refuges is something that every Republican administration does. I don't find it that shocking, and it's something that the Fish and Wildlife Service does anyway. Hunting and fishing are big six uses. We're going to get to how they actually might be able to do it when they are lacking staff. So we're going to get to that. Oversight with DOJ, they're not at Interior yet. As of this morning, they have not landed in Interior, but they're going to. We've seen it all over the news. They're going agency by agency. It's just a matter of time before they get to Interior. I don't know when that will be, but it will happen for sure. The likely targets are going to be ESA, the Endangered Species Act. I can't imagine that it wouldn't be. Elon Musk has had it out for the Fish and Wildlife Service because of some of the regulations for his SpaceX launches, which are right next to the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge in Florida and near some refuges in South Texas and some state lands. And some of those launches, other advocacy groups, not ours, but others have challenged him. And so he's ripe to go after the Fish and Wildlife Service, as are most Republicans. Again, nothing shocking in going after ESA. Oil and gas, migratory birds, these are going to be places where Trump administration did it the first time. I can't imagine. Other targets, it's really unclear. I don't know where the urban program is going to be with this administration yet. They could see it as a diversity thing. I don't know. I think that if they looked at it more closely, they would realize that it's way more than that. But as you guys have seen, they're not necessarily looking with a scalpel right now. Next slide, Eden. Also in the executive branch, there's some big things going on, right? There is an effort to shrink the entire federal workforce. They started out on day one with a federal hiring freeze. That's not new. That is very common for any administration. So I don't want to make it sound like that's something really shocking. It's not. There were refuge system jobs that were rescinded in some places. Seasonal jobs were frozen. That included interns and fire and biological work. It's my understanding that some of that has been loosened up, but not all. Some fire, perhaps. And then they identified people right off the bat who are in a probationary period for firing. That was early on. That's been going on since not quite day one, but it was basically looking at anyone employed for 1 or 2 years. It depends on the position, what the probationary period is. And as we saw on Friday, they fired 370 Fish and Wildlife Service employees. I will get to this a little bit more. We reported on Friday that it was 420. That number did come down through the day because the Fish and Wildlife Service was able to sort of talk about some really needed programs. But the people who were exempt on Friday were law enforcement, fire, veterans, and anyone who is in an emergency response. So if in the Fish and Wildlife Service, there are people who manage emergencies, and those people were exempted. And again, we'll get to this a little bit more. Some other ways that the efforts to shrink the federal workforce was no remote work. That definitely did not impact all of the Fish and Wildlife Service because so many people do their work in the field, but it definitely does impact people in the regions and others. There are people who have been working part-time from home since the COVID. January 28th, we all heard about this. That was the fork in the road email. The administration, they say that 75,000 federal employees took the buyout. We don't know how many at Interior or the Refuge System, but we know that many took it. And it is unclear at this moment whether those people will be paid past March 14th. March 14th is when this current fiscal year funding ends. They don't have any funding going past March 14th. So it's unclear what will happen to those folks. But as we'll get to, people are tired, they're demoralized, and they just want out. So there are a lot of people who took the fork in the road. Then other ways that they're going to look for reducing the federal workforce are going to be retirements. Those could be early retirements or anyone who is eligible. And then a reduction in force, or what's called a RIF, will likely be next. And I'll talk about that because it's going to be in conjunction with budget cuts. Next slide. Shrinking the federal workforce is part of the bigger picture of shrinking the federal government. That is the overall picture. This is about shrinking the entire federal government. So you guys will, I'm sure, recall January 27th. That was a day that will live with all of us in the nonprofit world of pausing all federal grants. Chaos followed. I think you guys might remember the Republican, they were on a recess down in Florida. They started getting calls from their constituents, and it was complete chaos. The administration walked that back and rescinded it. But we've learned, and others in other bureaus have learned, that a lot of those payments are still frozen, and those are defying court orders. I will say that I think constitutional crisis gets bandied about a little bit too much, but this is a place where it could. If you have an executive branch defying the judicial branch, that is where this could come into play. So this is still ongoing, obviously. And then they said that they were going to end all leases. Like, this is mainly for government buildings, and the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Refuge System has a lot of leased office space. But if you're making people go back to work and then you're also canceling their leases, it's a little confusing to try to figure out that whole thing. But so still unknown how all of this is going to work. But again, the larger picture is shrinking the entire federal government. Next slide, Eden. Part of shrinking the entire federal government means shrinking federal lands and waters. I do not say this lightly, but I think we need to be prepared that this administration is going to do anything they can to shrink the federal estate. So if there are leases with states to manage refuges, they could cancel those. They could repeal marine national monuments. 100% on the table. I'm anticipating even something today. Selling public lands. This is something that was in Project 2025. And the person who wrote that portion of Project 2025 was in the Trump administration the first time. He ran the BLM. He was also someone who defied a court order. He was told to vacate his position, and he did not. His name's William Penley. He has talked about especially selling BLM lands, but I do not think that we should think that this could not happen to the National Wildlife Refuge System. At different times in the refuge system's history, there has been efforts to sell off public lands. One was recent, actually, by Democrats in Congress who wanted to sell the Vieques National Wildlife Refuge in Puerto Rico. to help fund the Puerto Rican debt bill. And I was told by Nancy Pelosi's office that it was just something that was going to happen. And only because local constituents and the Hispanic caucus in Congress fought back did that not happen. But you are supposed to go through Congress to sell public lands. And I say supposed to because everything is sort of, it may be the law, but there could be a reinterpretation of laws, and we could be looking at something quite different. It could also be used as a way to generate money in the budget process. Next slide. That's where Congress comes in. And the reality is there is, as you guys have all seen, little oversight or pushback from the legislative branch on all these actions. The truth is Congress right now, which is led by the GOP in the House and the Senate, is largely willing to sort of let things go and see where they land. I think if you have a wholesale suggestion to sell off public lands, that could be something that they don't want to do. I will say that the Trump administration pushed back a bit and rescinded some of their orders to stop seasonal hirings for the Park Service. I don't know if they will do it for other agencies, but they know where the American public is, and public lands is something very important to the American people. That doesn't mean that they will completely do it. And I will say that I've been working with Congress now for over 25 years. And it's been going on longer than that, but Congress has been abrogating their responsibility to the executive branch for decades. I've watched it happen. I've watched it happen with both parties. And both parties, when their person is in the White House, they cede authority to the executive branch. This is not something that has just happened overnight. It has been going on for a long time, and things are now coming to a boiling point. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Congress. Next slide, Eden. So the legislative branch. I've just talked all about the executive branch and the things that they have done or that they could do. The budget reconciliation process is something that Congress does. And it starts with a budget resolution, and then it goes to a budget reconciliation. In a nutshell, this is what it is. They pass a budget resolution saying, here's where we're going to spend money. They send instructions to all of the committees in Congress. And those committees come up with how they are going to implement this. They're either going to find savings or they are going to generate revenue. That's why they are budget bills. So they either make money or they spend money. And we saw in 2017, there was an effort to generate money through the Tax Act to open the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to oil and gas drilling. So it mandated 2 lease sales there. It also changed the purpose of the Arctic Refuge to an oil and gas purpose. It is supposed to be equal to the other purposes, but that is something that I've got my spidey sense thinking about. Could they change and add oil and gas to the purpose of every individual refuge in budget reconciliation? They could. Right now, oil and gas is a purpose of only the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And I mean a purpose, which means the Fish and Wildlife Service shall manage for it. But it is not a purpose of other refuges. So that's one thing that scares me. And then appropriations. I think there are massive budget cuts coming. For FY25, the continuing resolution, or CR in DC speak, ends on March 14th, which incidentally is the birthday of the National Wildlife Refuge System. Also, incidentally, Pi Day, my dad's birthday. March 14th is a great day, but it's going to be a tough day. Right now, I think we're looking at a government shutdown. At this point, both Republicans and Democrats want it to happen for different reasons. Okay, so in the Republican side, it fits into the larger let's shrink government, right? So shut it down. For the Democrats, it can be they want to make things hurt and show the American public what happens if you shut down government. Shutting down the government has never worked for the party who has pushed it the most. The Democrats also want to try to retain try to minimize the cuts as much as possible. Appropriations bills are supposed to have a majority in the House and 60 votes in the Senate. So to get it to pass the Senate, you're going to have bipartisan support of funding bills. I am honestly unknown what is going to happen between now and March 14th, but I know there are efforts to cut the budget drastically. Then they're working on the FY26 numbers through the budget reconciliation process that I just mentioned. This is how they could say that they are going to sell off public lands in order to generate money. And they will be generating money everywhere they can, under every single rock, everything that you can possibly imagine, because they also want to spend trillions on tax cuts. Trillions. You can't balance the budget on the programs of the federal government. You can't. So I don't know how they're going to do it. They have to come up with some gimmicks to say that they're going to generate revenue. It could be through, again, additional leases for oil and gas. It could be selling off public lands. Nothing is off the table as they are trying to figure this out. I don't know whether it'll be 1 or 2 bills. That's also up for grabs. The House wants, I think, now I can't even remember. I think the House wants 1 bill. I think the Senate wants 2. There have been a lot of back and forth about this. Do you do one on border and energy? Do you separate those? Do you do border, energy, and tax cuts? It's a lot because it was hard for the Democrats to do 2 in 1 year, and it will be hard for the Republicans to do 2 in 1 year. So I don't know where that'll go, but budget reconciliation, because budget reconciliation only needs 50 votes in the Senate. That is why it's so important. You can get through massive things that otherwise would not be able to pass the Senate. That's how we got Obamacare. That's how we got the 2017 tax cuts. It's through the budget reconciliation process. Next slide, Eden. So what's happening in the refuge system? You guys know this. If you've been talking to anyone in the refuge system, the staff are afraid. They're anxious. They think that they have a target on their head. If they aren't let go by the administration over perceived bias, they could be let go in a reduction in force. A reduction in force is just across the board. And if there are massive budget cuts, the refuge system just doesn't have the ability anymore to absorb budget cuts. They just don't. And I'll get to that in a minute. And then there's a lot of pressures to take an early retirement, these buyouts. And you know what? A lot of people, we cannot blame anyone for getting out right now. It's a toxic place right now in the federal government. Just being a federal employee, they don't feel like they're valued by the American people, and they're scared. They're scared about what might happen to them. Next slide. Oh, and thank you, Caroline. Caroline just direct messaged me and said Obamacare was not passed under budget reconciliation. It was passed under regular order. And I trust Caroline because she knows a lot about public health and she used to work for me. So I know that she would not say that. So thank you, Caroline. I appreciate it. The reality of the refuge system, it's not a bloated bureaucracy. You all know this as you work with people across the United States. You know it. The workforce has shrunk to 2,300 people. That was as of Friday. Now it's approximately 2,230 people. That's down 30% from 15 years ago. Let me just say that again. 30% of the staff of the National Wildlife Refuge System has gone away in 15 years. So if you think you're imagining something that your refuge used to be really well staffed 20 years ago, you're not wrong. They've been doing more for less for years, and they now face censure, ridicule, and confusion. They're just trying to do their jobs, and they're being vilified by their neighbors. I will tell you, we put out an alert on Friday, and we got almost all positive things, but the messages that were negative are hard to read. That people hate the Fish and Wildlife Service. They hate the federal government. It's time to let everybody go. It's nasty, vitriolic stuff. And it's not coming to us. We're just an advocate. So people who wear the uniform and walk around in their community feel unsafe. And we've seen this at different times with federal employees being vilified. So again, for those who do take a buyout or early retirement, you have to understand why. It's because they don't feel safe right now, and they don't feel valued. And that's what we need to change. Eden, next slide. So here's a little bit more of the reality. There is no land agency overstaffed, period. Even the Park Service and the Forest Service, they aren't overstaffed. They need more. But the refuge system is the smallest of all of them. So here's a few. These are pre-Valentine's Day numbers. Forest Service had approximately 30,000 FTEs, so full-time equivalents. Okay, they have 193 million acres. They got a lot to deal with and a lot of fire. National Park Service, approximately 20,000 employees at 85 million acres, comparable in size of land to the refuge system. 20,000 employees. Bureau of Land Management, 10,000 employees. They have much more acres, 245 million acres. That's the one where there will definitely be an effort to sell off those lands of the Bureau of Land Management. And then you look at the refuge system. Okay, so now we're likely at about 2,230 with the firings, a 31% cut from FY 2010. That's 90 million acres of land, so about the same size as the Park Service, and a fraction of the amount of full-time equivalents managing it. Now, to a certain degree, we, over the past 20 years, have not compared agencies because we don't want to throw anyone under the bus. But I think it's important for the American people to understand, if you do an across-the-board cut to all these agencies, you know, cut them by 50%. The Forest Service goes down to 15,000 employees. The refuge system goes down to a little over 1,000. You can't run the refuge system the way it is. You can't. You won't be able to do things. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about these pieces. I'm going to go just a little bit on the presidential appointments and what we know. Next slide. We do know that Secretary Burgum, he is in Interior. He started a couple weeks ago. He is going to be mainly focused on oil and gas. He will have a deputy. I just blanked on her name. I can see her face. Kate, what's her name? Somebody put it in the chat. It'll come. Kate McGregor. Kate McGregor was at Interior before, and she is expected to come back as his deputy. She will be the person getting the trains to run on time. She's a highly effective individual. As we say, she's someone who gets stuff done. And she will be charged with operating the Department of Interior while Burgum is focused on increased oil and gas on refuges. I will say, I have friends in the oil industry. It's how much can you actually drill more right now? Because oil companies do not want to drill more if the price goes too low. So there is going to be an interesting setup on some of these pieces as they try to extract even more oil and gas. The price can go too low and oil and gas companies don't want to do it. So that's something that obviously we as Americans are probably not going to be privy to those conversations, but it's a reality to watch. And by the way, as someone who, I do have a diesel truck, I have a diesel tractor, and I will tell you, diesel has not come down at all. It's only going to go up. So trucking across the United States, diesel is expensive. Next slide. We do have now a nominated Fish and Wildlife Service Director, Brian Nesvik. I have not met with him, and I haven't worked with him, but I do know people who have. He is a career person with Wyoming Game and Fish. He was their director since 2019. He's a former member of the Wyoming Army National Guard, and by an article that he said his proudest accomplishments are getting kids outdoors, invasive species, and building wildlife crossings. This is someone we can work with. This is, I'm sure he's going to be conservative, but he's a game warden. He understands public lands, and I really think that his heart will be in the right place. That said, he will have to do a lot of stuff, and a lot of those things are probably going to be with endangered species. And, you know, he will have to do what the administration wants him to do. So we will try to meet with him, but just to let you all know that is who, he probably won't get a Senate confirmation. I would think, what are we, almost probably late March, maybe April. You've got to go through hearings, and they're still working on other confirmations in the Senate. They'll do Kate McGregor first, and they'll sort of work their way down. But he's in the mix, and I doubt there will be huge pushback. Next slide. So what can Friends do? Next slide. Well, stand for your mission as an organization. You need to be the voice. The Fish and Wildlife Service cannot speak right now. They are like the wildlife they protect and serve. They cannot speak. If they speak out, they are more than likely going to be retaliated against. Local reporters. I talked to someone on the Hill last week, and they said the number one thing that Friends groups can do is get these stories out in the local media. It is the number one thing that can help turn the tide with Congress. Congress needs to see what's happening. I'll get to that. But the reporters and your local stories are going to be the way to do it. Also on social media, you as Friends groups have a huge following. You need to get the stories out. You have to make it real. I put in here some questions. How many staff lost in the firings? How many are taking the buyout, that fork in the road? How many are going to retire soon? How many staff will be left? What will they be able to do? What isn't going to happen on your refuge? You know, this is where you have to try to work with your staff. I would try to have meetings in person with your staff. I would frankly try not to put much in writing. You do not want your colleagues in the Fish and Wildlife Service, again, to be retaliated against. It's your right as an American citizen to get this information, and you're the partner of these refuges at the Friends level. So asking for this information is what you need to understand how your refuges are going to operate. Next slide. You need to get the facts, okay? And then you need to put the numbers in perspective. As we said, how many staff did you used to have? What isn't going to get done? It could be bird surveys. I think there's going to be a lot of hunt programs that can't happen. Volunteer programs, visitor center hours. How does the loss of staff hurt your refuge or refuges in the community? And then put a face on these facts. I saw that there was a lot of folks here in the chat from some of the Hawaiian Friends groups. These were folks who were let go. They were fired over the weekend. And I think this was on a member of Friends of Midway's website. So I put this on here. They are getting their messages out about this. And I'm going to go a little bit into more of some of this, a few other pieces. Next slide. I think, I don't know if there's anyone from Crystal River, but Friends of Crystal River did a great job yesterday. Got an amazing story out in the public. The story was Federal Cuts Endanger Local Wildlife Agency's Mission. And I will actually, I will go ahead and put that in the chat so you guys can all see it. Let me just do that before I forget. So here's a link to that article. The Friends president, Casey Mayfield, was quoted. I'm sorry, I don't know if Casey is a male or female, but they spoke about what the firings mean to the refuge. Like the volunteer coordinator was fired, who oversees 200 volunteers. Those are actual volunteers from the Crystal River Refuge. So you're not just losing that staff person, you are losing the ability to oversee the volunteer work. I'm sure that's happening other places. That's just cutting your nose off to spite your face, right? But these were not firings that looked at merit or need of the refuge. They were just indiscriminate because, again, this is about numbers. This is about slashing the federal workforce as quickly as you can. These are the low-hanging fruit, right? You were in a probationary period. It's not up. Maybe you were gonna be, your probationary period ended today. Doesn't matter. You were let go. Doesn't matter that you were an intern for years, that there was a gentleman in the National Park Service who spent, all of his time getting a PhD so that he would be qualified for this job. And then he's let go. But you need to talk about what it means. For Crystal River, they said they now have 6 employees to manage 5 refuges. They had 12 just a few years ago, 10 years ago. That's 5 refuges. And I know these stories are across the refuge system. Next slide, Eden. Be the voice to Congress. Members of Congress have to understand what this means. So when you get an article like the Friends of Crystal River did, you share it on social media with all your supporters. You share it with every member of your Florida congressional delegation so that they understand what it means. Crystal River is a place that drives the local economy. People come to see the manatees. It's a huge draw. Florida natural resources are really important, but they need to understand, the members of Congress need to understand what it means. And by having it out in the media and on social media, they can't hide from it. They have to understand what it means. This was another post about Hakalau Forest, where half the field staff were fired on Friday. Next slide. And I found theirs to be a really impactful piece too, because they talked about things like, well, in the past, 5 years, they've been able to eradicate a lot of feral pigs. Well, feral pigs seem like a weird thing, but they create bogs of water and mud where mosquitoes thrive. The mosquitoes carry diseases to the endemic birds. But what those staff had done for years, many of them had been interns before they were staff. They also had turned the greenhouse at Hakalau into a thriving place for propagating native plants. They were doing all this work and they were all let go. I know there were examples of people out on islands. I don't even know if those people are back yet. These are remote islands where they're working. It's pretty tough. We are trying to come up with anecdotal stories on what these means. So Eden, who is the one sharing her screen today, and on here, that's her email address. You can send her anecdotal stories about what it means. Putting a face to the name is important so that they're not lost. And then those folks can also send their stories themselves to either Eden or our general email box. They can do it anonymously or with their name. Next slide, Eden. I also want to point out that the Fish and Wildlife Service Retirees Association is a resource as well. There was an offer for immediate membership to the Fish and Wildlife Service retirees. And in their words, I'll just read it, just come. Because you no longer have a physical duty station, a working business telephone, or access to computer-based email, it's nearly impossible for us to find you. But we do not intend to lose you. Reach out to us at Fish and Wildlife Service Retirees. What happened to you is not right. It is not the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service way. We stand by our people. And we work closely with the Retirees Association. Many members of our board are retired Fish and Wildlife Service employees. And so we're trying to figure out if there is something that we can do. There's been a lot of suggestions to say, maybe we could create a fund and people could donate to the fund, and then we could try to, provide grants or, funding back to some of these people. It's a little harder than it seems, but we are looking into it. And I know I'll also, as in the questions, I think Corpa looked into it also a couple years ago, and it was not as easy as it seems for friends groups. But I think you as individuals of friends groups in the local community could probably do a lot. If there are people who have lost their jobs, you and your local community might be able to help them find something temporary or permanent. Some people were living in refuge housing. And so they may need immediate help in finding housing in some of these more remote locations. And so there's ways that you as individuals can help that perhaps you might not as a friends group. And I may, next slide is just Q&A, I believe, Eden. So we can stop sharing. And I don't know if anyone from Corfa wants to talk about that. And we can also look at some of the questions in the friends group. Anyone from Corfa want to just talk about what happened under when we looked into or when you all looked into this before about making a fund?
Yeah, I can talk about it very briefly, Desiree, because I'm trying to remember what we found out. It was as a result of some natural disasters, I believe in Oklahoma and also in Texas. The Friends groups were looking at setting up funds to distribute it to park service, to refuge service folks. And what we discovered was it can get to be very difficult because you have to, there were things like you have to make that funding available to multiple entities. You know, you can't just slice it down to an employee or something. So there's a whole slew of regulations that the IRS has on this. So before doing anything, important to look it up. And if I can find that resource, I will send it on to Eden so it can be included in the recording and resources that go out.
Thanks, Joan.
Okay.
Go ahead, Desiree.
Well, I was just looking for questions here or comments.
Yeah, I've got a bunch.
Okay,
I've got
go
a bunch for you. And also 2 things I wanted to say. First of all, thanks Eden for handling all the technology here. And thank you, Joan, for always knowing the historic stuff that we don't remember. First question is, you said DOJ hasn't gotten to Interior yet, but they have fired folks from Fish and Wildlife, BLM, Park Service. Elaborate. Do you expect additional firings in DC, for example?
So DOJ they literally have people landing in agencies and then, as you guys have seen on the news, getting control of Department of Treasury payments, trying to get control of Social Security. So they will get to Interior and they will be looking at ways that they can cut red tape or create efficiencies. That's what I mean. The firing of probationary people was, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could say it's by DOJ, but those are all folks that are the probationary period was something that was done by Interior in the previous administration, unless they started working since January 20th. So that's just federal government. If you just start with an agency, you have a probationary period. In some cases, these people worked at other departments in the federal government, but they reset when they went to the Fish and Wildlife Service. Sometimes they didn't happen that way. So it's been a little bit across the board. I don't know what the whiteboard is, Eden. Never mind. It was a mistake. Okay. So when I say that DOJ will land at Interior, I mean that there will be physical people that will get to the Department of Interior. They will walk in the door and they will be asking for, access to ESA permits, to who is benefiting from grants. There's a whole slew of things that they will look at. They're doing it to every department. So they will land eventually at the Department of Interior. They're just not there yet. That's what I mean when I say that. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Desiree. Another question from Jonathan. This may be a side issue, but do you know what the status of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation is and its grant making under the funding freeze?
I don't. I've been having emails back and forth with them. I think that the good thing about NFWF, or the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, we love our acronym, so NFWF, the good thing is they bring in hundreds of millions of dollars from outside the federal government. They get some money through the appropriations process. I think it's around $10 to $12 million a year. It is very small in the amount of money that they bring in overall. So but some of their money comes from the federal government. It is true that some of it. So I don't know that their funding would be frozen, but I'm sure that they're looking at it. I have seen some articles where people are going after the leadership of NFWF and saying that they are overpaid. There is a woman who traveled around with President Trump during the campaign, and she has gone after the president and other leaders at NFWF. And so I'm sure that they're on a target list. But the head of the National Fish and Wildlife Service, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation is a guy named Jeff Trandle. Jeff is very smart. And again, he's brought in hundreds of millions. He's brought in billions of dollars over his career. So if you're talking about a quasi-governmental agency, they bring in tons of money from other sources, from private donations, from corporations. So I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's going to be more difficult to go after them. But I I think that they've got a target on them, just like everyone who's related in government in some way.
Okay, next, I think these next questions were all related to a slide that you showed. These are the numbers fired or the numbers left?
Numbers fired or the numbers left. So that was probably that slide, Eden. If you put it up, it is number, you probably can find it faster than I can. Yeah, that one. So these are who should be left. Now, these are pre-Valentine's Day, except for the refuge system. I believe, I don't remember, there's been just rumors about how many were fired in each agency, but pre-Friday, the Forest Service had about 30,000, Park Service about 20,000. I think Park Service, the last I heard, I was talking to a colleague at the National Parks Conservation Association. They're sort of like us, but for parks, and much, much bigger. They said about 1,000 Park Service employees got fired on Friday. BLM, I think, was around 800 employees. So the Fish and Wildlife Service was a lot smaller in those, except look at the numbers of the staff. I mean, losing 123 staff of the Fish and Wildlife Service is a lot right now. So I think those numbers right there are current as of Friday morning.
Thank you. Zach says, thanks for these workforce numbers. Please send more detailed numbers on U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service specifically. So I'm sure that Desiree will be providing those as they're available.
Well, yeah, they're not available right now. So let me tell you, I did talk to some people in the Fish and Wildlife Service over the weekend. If they gave me the exact numbers that they know, my guess is there is a very small number of people in the federal government who know exactly how many people were fired in each bureau. And should those numbers come out, then they will know exactly where leaks are, and they will be able to fire those people very quickly. So there is a reason. There's also, I heard that I think the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, they had requested final firing numbers from all agencies by 5 p.m. tonight. So the truth is, and no one is answering any reporters' questions at a Department of Interior. Nobody. So they're also the Department of Interior's communications team's putting out misinformation, not on purpose. They just don't have a lot of people there yet. They put out that yesterday, President's Day, was a waiving of fees to go onto public lands. It is not. So they put out some misinformation. There's just not a lot of people in the comm shop right now in the Department of Interior. So there's no way to collaborate these numbers right now from the federal government. I think members of Congress should be asking for these numbers. That's probably going to be the way that they start to come out, because members of Congress are asking, what in the world did you just do? And they deserve answers.
Thank you. From Bonnie, how can we develop a message to get the general public to care about public lands at a time when they are losing their jobs, healthcare, educational resources, and so on?
Bonnie, it's hard. But we as a nation have always cared about our natural resources. From the time of our country's founding, public lands have been something that is important to the American people. So while people are very concerned about inflation and putting food on their table, they don't want public lands to go away. It is important to them. And I think, think back on the time of the Dust Bowl. People were using public lands to try to hunt and fish, but there weren't species. Part of the reason the refuge system grew so much in the 1930s is to create redundancy in the refuge system. So waterfowl in particular had a whole bunch of stopovers on the migratory waterways around the east and west flyways, and then the central and the Mississippi. That's why so many refuges are in those places. I think that we have to remember that just because we care about our fellow man and people losing their jobs, we also care about the resources themselves. And people can do both. You can
Toby, shut up.
You can hold space for both. That was probably someone's dog, because I often say that to my dogs, who are being so nice laying at my feet right now.
I don't think they were talking to you.
No, I think I feel like that's a dog voice.
Yep.
So I think that we can do both, and we have to. Let me be more clear. We have to do both. If we don't stand up for public lands and the refuge system, what these places do, nobody else is going to. It depends on your refuge, what's important to you. It might be that you're a coastal refuge and you help provide resiliency from storms. It could be that you're, I see Eileen, your refuge does environmental education with like San Francisco Bay. There's so many different reasons that each refuge exists. But also, refuges are important to local communities. And I think that's one thing that I think that we can all try to get across more clearly. National parks are wonderful and great, and I love to visit national parks. People from around the world visit national parks. People from around the world also visit national wildlife refuges, but they're more a resource of your local community. The people who use national wildlife refuges are people in your community. That's who cares. And that's why it's so important to get the word out to your local media and your social media channels, because those are the people who care the most about your local resource. If your local refuge gets shut down, who is going to care? It's your local community. That's the people who need to understand. Your chamber of commerce. If you're like, I don't know, Chincoteague, talk to your chamber of commerce about what will happen if your refuge closes down. And that's everybody. I'm just using Chincoteague because it's, a highly visited refuge. But everyone in their community cares about these natural areas. I think that you will see huge amounts of hunt programs shut down in the fall. There's going to be no one to run them. And this administration may try to get states to run them. States don't have the money either. So your sportsmen are going to be my next stop. Friends groups, you are my first stop. Let me just say, you are the first stop. You are the people in local communities who can turn this around with members of Congress and the media. My next stop is going to be sportsmen. And we work a lot with really great sporting groups, but you guys are number one, and then I'll talk to them. What other questions we have?
How many of the remaining Fish and Wildlife Service resources are in the field?
I don't know that answer. I'm sorry. I wish I do. I hope to get some more specific numbers on staffing. I just don't know right now.
Desiree, could I interrupt just to make a comment on the
Sure, David.
raising money for fish and wildlife people who are impacted? If friends groups set up a fund so that people can contribute to it, then people can contribute to it and it will be tax deductible so that they can encourage people to contribute more if it goes through their 501c3 friends group.
Right. But that's the thing that Joan was saying. It may not be appropriate for your friends group to do that, depending on your bylaws and how you were set up. And that's the concern, that you might not be able to do that. Joan, I don't know if you have more to add to that.
Yeah, that's just what I have found, David, that because it doesn't really fit within your mission, that there's some concerns about it. I will go through my stuff and see if I can find, it was a very well-written article that explained why it's really hard for a nonprofit who doesn't have the mission of providing support to individuals to go about setting up these emergency funds.
Thank you, Joan.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's what we're trying to figure out. And I will be talking to, we have a council on our board, and I'll be talking to him as well to look at our bylaws and see how that looks. But there's nothing preventing you as individuals in your community from doing something, trying to help someone find a job. Maybe they need housing, maybe they need food, or you giving to them directly as you as an individual, not as a friends group. That there's nothing stopping you from that.
Just coincidentally, as you were talking about the importance of getting media coverage and local media, Daniel Price had to drop off the webinar because he had a meeting with a newspaper reporter. So, and it happened just right as you were talking about that. So
Excellent.
That's the kind of thing we need. How do we get the story out in the local media without our refuge partners being seen as having delivered information to us about what's happening at their sites? It's scary for them to say anything to us.
Well, number one, if you get the information, I would talk to the staff about what they are comfortable with you sharing. The truth is, these are just facts too. If the refuge, if they just lost 3 staff members, why would they be prohibited from talking about it? So that's something that if they are, I get the danger and the of retaliation, but at the same time, it's just the facts. So how are they supposed to keep it hidden? It's a kind of a catch-22. But I talk to the folks at your refuge staff and see what they are comfortable with, and then I would also not you don't have to attribute anything. You could just say, well, as a Friends member, we had a meeting with the local staff, and I noticed that 3 people were missing. So you could sort of bend the truth a little bit and or ask for the meeting and say, oh, I've noticed that Jane, Bill, and Tom aren't here. Does that mean that they were fired? I mean, you could look about it that way. But I think at some point, the Fish and Wildlife Service is going to have to acknowledge these firings, and the regional offices will have to. They're going to have to come up with something that they can say. I mean, I think maybe, or you could also ask for your member of Congress to ask for a complete reckoning of who was let go at your refuge. That might be another way around it as well. I will say we, as a board of the National Wildlife Refuge Association, we are having a board meeting next week, which is timely because every February we meet in DC so that we can also do hill visits. So we will be doing hill visits next week. Many members of our board are members of the Friends community. A few of them on here, Joan, Cheryl, Mike Baldwin, are just 3. And I said we also have former Fish and Wildlife Service folks. So we will be doing as strategic meetings as we possibly can next week. I've already been told that a few folks won't meet with us, and somewhat because they don't have anything good to tell us. So if you are, say, the ranking or you're the chairman of the House Interior Appropriations Committee, I've worked with this gentleman for many years. His name's Mike Simpson. I really like Mr. Simpson. He's not going to meet with us. 2 reasons. One, they are doing a big public witness day that day for Indigenous people. So he will be in and out. But number 2, he has nothing good to tell us. Nothing. And he is going to be working with a tiny amount of money for the interior bill. And so it's not a meeting that he's desperate to take. So each of you can also do meetings with your local members of Congress in the district. We can talk about doing a joint Corfa and Refuge Association fly-in, say March or April, for anyone who can fly in. Unfortunately, I do not have money to bring you into DC, but if you come here, we can definitely help with member meetings and all the fact sheets and talking points and everything else. I think this is going to be really important that we all as Americans stand up for what's important to us. Because if we don't, I guarantee you that these are low-hanging fruit. Eden and I were just on an email coalition for public lands, and an organization who will remain nameless so that you don't get mad at them. But they put out a fact sheet for the media about these firings and about all the budget cuts across all these land management agencies. So they talked about the Forest Service, and they talked about the EPA and the Park Service and the BLM. And oh my gosh, all the horrible things that are happening. Did they mention the Fish and Wildlife Service or the Refuge System? No, they did not. They did not. It is really frustrating also in Washington because a lot of our NGO partners do not talk about the refuge system. So I sent a strongly worded email to my colleague at that organization, and hopefully they will change their fact sheet and include some impacts to the refuge system. But this is what you guys all deal with. It's what we deal with. A lot of people don't know that the refuge system exists. And this is what even in the NGO world, and this was a big nonprofit, a very big nonprofit that I'm sure many of you give to. And I will just say they're not evil people, but it's just not a priority. And we have to change that. We have to make the refuge system a priority. By the way, I see it as 3 o'clock. I am willing to stay on for anyone else who can. So this is my top priority.
Thanks for doing that, Desiree, and please do. I'm still going down through the chat box. We still will try to get to your oral questions if we need to do that as well. Isn't it true that there were no bids on recent ONG lease sales in Northern Alaska? Industry is either not interested or so unsure of the stability of the administration that they won't make the investment.
So that's about drilling in the Arctic refuge. There were no lease sales. I'm sorry, there were no bids on lease sales. I think that it's a couple things. Number one, oil companies don't want to drill in the Arctic refuge. They don't know if there's oil there. There's no infrastructure, so they can't make money. They would much rather go to what's called the Western Arctic, and they can make a lot more money. That's number one. Number two, they know that this administration is going to allow them to drill as much as they want. So they didn't need to bid on leases in the past lease sale because they know that this administration will do it. I think that market forces will, no oil company wants to drill there, no big oil company, but there will be wildcatters who do. So it's something we still have to pay attention to. And if they open up more lands to drilling, then we're going to have to watch this in a lot of different places. So don't freak out yet. We will keep you posted on that, but it's a possibility that I'm at least, it's swirling in the back of my mind.
Thank you. Do you foresee Friends volunteers doing restoration work blocked from access to refuge land?
This is something, so we have a meeting, as I said, our board meeting next week. And on Thursday afternoon, the chiefs of the entire refuge system will come to our meeting. We have been doing this for like 20 years, where the chiefs and the Refuge Association board come together. This is one of the questions that we will be asking them. Will Friends be able to help do things? I don't know how much Friends will be able to do. Like, I don't think Friends can oversee volunteers. I think the overseeing of volunteers is an inherently federal position. But I don't know this administration. I think this administration will try to figure out ways around keeping refuges open. I think what you're going to see is they will try to it could be getting a volunteer or a Friends member to open the gates and close the gates. And then there is no presence on a refuge. It could be things like that so that they could say that these places are still open to the American public. As we know, that means that there will be increased crime, there will be vandalism, there will be bad things happen by bad people. That's just the reality. And refuges are no different than other public lands. We saw it during COVID, and we've seen it during other closures. I'm glad that these firings that happened on Friday did not include law enforcement, but that's only because there's barely enough law enforcement as it is. Well, there's not enough. They should have at least 1,000 full-time equivalents, FTE for law enforcement. And I think it's maybe like 300. I think that might be a high number. I'd have to go back in my records and look, but I think it's pretty bad.
Polly says, can't we join the Alt Parks group and join forces?
Yeah, the Alt Parks group is a great group if you follow them on Facebook. They're great. There used to be an Alt Fish and Wildlife Service group. I don't know if that still exists. And they definitely seem to keep their well, number one, they're witty and funny, and they seem to have good information. So I think we all need to band together. This is about public lands and banding together with the Park Service, Forest Service, BLM. Public lands are under threat right now. So while, yes, I want you to fight for your refuge, and the refuge system, I also want to fight for public lands, because public lands mean a lot to us as Americans. And I think that we have to band together to do that. And Cheryl, I know that there was also a couple hands raised, and I don't know if you're monitoring that too.
I did see that. I was trying to get through these, but I've got 69 new messages that I haven't even gotten to yet. So how about we take, I can't read the name for whose hand is raised, but we have whoever has their hand raised on the screen.
I know there's a Buffalo Bills person.
That's me.
Why don't we go ahead and take your question, and I'll try to feed through these.
All right, so I was late to the meeting and I'm hearing that you're talking about the firings mainly. I was in an appointment, so I tuned in as soon as I could. So I live in Buffalo, New York, obviously, because I have a Bills emblem on my thing. And I have been involved with a group of people called the Allies of the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. And we're fighting a thing called the STAMP Project, which is Science, Technology, Advanced Manufacturing Park, that they're trying to build an industrial park next to the Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge. There's also 3 other wildlife management areas there and the Tonawanda Seneca Nation's Big Woods, which is another protected area. I am concerned that they want to put a data center right next to the refuge. And is there any way that we could stop this?
Well, everything that we've been talking about for firings impacts your specific thing too. You've got to get the message out to your local media. You have to get people in your community. That's it. That's the only way that any of this stuff stops, right? You have to start. You have to get the message out. Why is the refuge important? What will be the impact of an action? And what can be done? And then getting it out in the media, you're showing that it matters. You may want to talk to your Chamber of Commerce about it, but that then you take to your members of Congress. It's all sort of the same. It's the same sort of actions. You're just talking about something different. Instead of the firings, you're talking about a proposed data center and what it could mean. And this is something that could face refuges all across the country as they use more energy. They need water. Data centers, which are driving AI. This is stuff that we will see more and more from. And I know Carol has had her hand up for quite a while too.
Let's go, Carol, let's go ahead and take your question too.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much. My question is, we could, the Friends, kind of quick rush in with various ideas on how to raise money, go to, change our fundraising methods, try to get some bigger things. But all of this has to be strategized by the refuge themselves and how their priorities are going to change and what they're going to need. Plus the fact that, as you told us today, a lot isn't loss of personnel and programs is not going to be known until the spring. So just you have just an estimate of how long might their process take before we want to start asking them questions. Do you need this? Do you need that? Shall we, because some of their ideas were aspirational, right? And maybe they can't do the aspirational ones anymore at this point. So it's a process they're going to have to go through, and I don't want to get in their way.
So I think having conversations as early as possible is going to be really important. I know your refuge manager really well, and I know he's thinking about the broader picture. And he's someone who has been sort of hoarding money for a long time, and knowing that things won't always be rosy. So your refuge probably sits better than a lot of refuges in the refuge system, to be perfectly honest. But that could be really short-lived. You are an urban refuge and you could have a bullseye on you. So it's something I would talk to your refuge staff about, what the most important things that they need to do. You guys all do this anyway. Most Friends groups sit down with the refuge staff at the beginning of the year. What are your priorities? What's the most important? How can we help? So you're putting it just in a slightly different context. I think as Friends groups, you guys want to do the most you can to help your refuge weather this. But one of the things that you can do, aside from maybe, I think someone put in the chat, like hiring staff or raising money for a, hire back like a biotech or something like that. I think one of the most important things you can do, though, is also talk about in your local public why this is so important to your community. I can't stress this enough, because you as Friends groups cannot keep a refuge running indefinitely. If that's the case, then why do we have Fish and Wildlife Service, right? Then we're talking about why don't we just give refuges to corporations to run? And by the way, I have heard that from again, another NGO in Washington at a CARE meeting that I was at. CARE is the Cooperative Alliance for Refuge Enhancement, and another organization talked about that we should just let these places be run and operated by corporations. I ended that conversation because it was so frustrating, but it's been happening. They told me that they had these meetings with the Trump administration the first time around. So they could be happening now already. I, as an American, do not want that to happen. I do not want a, I'll use the Heinz Refuge. I do not want it to be the Heinz Refuge in that it's Heinz ketchup, right? I don't want it to be a corporation that is running a National Wildlife Refuge. I don't want that to happen, and I don't think most people do. I forgot to mention one thing. I'm going to just take a.
Desiree, I wanted
oh,
to
yeah.
add in, I wanted to also ask about Public Lands Alliance and whether they're going to be helpful in this.
I would think they are. I have not talked to Dan. I definitely need to. So for PLA, Public Lands Alliance, they just had their conference, 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, Fish and Wildlife Service were pulled back from going to that. So that's a concern, but I will definitely have a conversation with Dan. And if anyone in Corfa does before me, just fill me in. We all work together, but we're going to have to band together as well. Like I said, I work with National Parks Conservation Association every day. They're a great organization. They're very powerful, and they have hundreds of staff and millions of dollars at their disposal, and they're a great partner to work with. And we're going to have to work with other organizations that support public lands if we're going to make it through this. Period. I mean, that's just the only way. One thing, I'm going to go off on a little tangent because I don't want to forget. You're going to start seeing another thing also, and I should have put this in the PowerPoint, about Senior Executive Series, or SES employees. These are people in the leadership of the government agencies, and they aren't on the chopping block. They can't be fired, but they can be moved, and they will be. As an effort to reduce the federal workforce, I think probably across the board, everyone in the SES series will be moved. And you get a reassignment, and you are sent either to another bureau or another location. You can be sent to Atlanta. Nobody wants to go to Atlanta. Sorry, Mark Misayas, if you're on here. So, I mean, I'm joking, right? But everyone in the Fish and Wildlife Service has a place of like, please don't send me to the briar patch, right? They've got some place they don't want to go. And they don't, maybe a bureau. Those moves happened during the first Trump administration. I'm sure I didn't hear it about as much in the Biden administration, but it happens every time. So we just haven't seen it yet. Those are coming soon, very soon. By the way, I just saw Florence La Riviere here on here. I didn't see her on there. Hi, Florence. I think Florence is one of the first people who started the Friends movement, along with Molly Cribble, way back in the 60s. So great to see you on here. Thank you. It's just so nice to see all your faces. So I just wanted to let you guys know that SES thing, that's a real thing. That's coming soon. I don't know if it'll be this week or next week, but it will be soon. That is going to be your regional directors, the chiefs of the refuge system, but there will be a shakeup. For sure, 100%.
Got any more good news for us, Desiree? Please discuss who the most important Republican members of Congress are in potentially changing the course of DOI and DOJ. Is NWRA focusing on them?
I'm sorry, and then that question, was that members of Congress or?
Most important Republican members of Congress, yes.
Well, I mean, we're trying, but right now our goal is to get friends groups to be the messenger. To be perfectly honest, members of Congress do not really want to hear from the Refuge Association. They want to hear from people in local communities. This has always been the case. This is nothing new. And this is certainly the case right now. So, we'll have meetings with members of Congress. Again, they don't want to hear from us as much. Lisa Murkowski may take our meeting in Alaska. She'd much rather hear from Alaska constituents. I know that's going to be difficult, but I think she may be an interesting person for the Friends to reach out to. And Friends of Alaska, I will reach out to you to chat about that. Like I said, Mike Simpson, who is Interior Appropriations Chairman, he's been there a long time. He's a really good man. He is going to get rolled. He is going to have to toe the line. He's got to stay in line. All Republicans who want to do something different are going to have the hammer come down on them hard. They are going to be primaried. And this is the reality. It's already been told to them that they're going to be primaried if they don't fall in line. And if you don't want to be primaried, then you have to fall in line. That's just the reality. So yes, we're trying to meet with Republican members, but I don't know that a lot of them are going to meet with us. They will meet with you. They will meet with their local constituents. They will. But we're a national organization. It's just harder. That's the reality. I want to meet with them.
They don't want to meet with us. Okay, from Bill McCoy, how will refuge land acquisition programs be impacted since there is LWCF funding available? Can LWCF funds be frozen?
It shouldn't be frozen because these are off budget. So the LWCF, Land and Water Conservation Fund, which for everyone takes money from offshore oil and gas royalties and puts into a fund for land and water acquisition. It goes to states and it goes to the federal government. They should not be frozen because they're off budget. But that doesn't mean that they won't be. They could be frozen through the executive branch, and then you're talking about lawsuits to get things going again. They could also be frozen simply because there isn't enough people to do the work. So appraisals, I think that the land acquisition process is going to grind to a halt. And that is going to put a lot of landowners in a really tough situation who have entered into agreements with the Fish and Wildlife Service or other Park Service, whatever agency, and they want to sell their land and they want it to go to a federal agency. But I think you're going to see these grind to a halt, but not because there's a frozen on dollars. I think that they're going to do that because there's not going to be people to do it. That'll require congressional oversight and getting the money going. And it will require a lot of landowners who this matters to start speaking to their members of Congress. There are a lot of, conservative Republicans who also want to sell their land to the federal government because they believe in conservation. Conservation is not a partisan issue. It is a bipartisan issue. And the truth is, Republicans and Democrats both believe in conservation. So yes, I have been talking about the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress, but the truth is there are a lot of Republicans who believe in conservation too. Like I said, like Mike Simpson is a great example. He really does believe in conservation, but he's going to get rolled. So we have to try to figure out ways through this. I see there's another question too in the chat about duck stamp money continue to be used for land acquisition. Well, it should be, but the Migratory Bird Commission could also decide not to meet. We're in uncharted waters here. So there is nothing, I don't believe, in the Migratory Bird Commission that requires them to acquire land. They could just keep the money and not acquire land. I don't know. That'll be interesting to see. There is a congressman in Virginia named Rob Whitman. He's got Rappahannock Refuge. Definitely want to meet with him. And I see you nodding your head. We do need to meet with him for sure. I was just emailing with Joe McCauley earlier. He is on the Migratory Bird Commission. He was also the chair of the Refuge Caucus. I think that he is a good guy. He's never really stood up for what he believes. I hate to say that. I really like him, but he just hasn't. He's another one. He would be primaried in a second. But there is a Refuge Caucus, Bonnie. But we need to reorganize it for this Congress. So every Congress, every 2 years, it has to get reorganized. And so that is something that Mike Thompson from California and Rob Whitman from Virginia are two of the people who have led that over the years. And that's who I'm talking about, Rob Whitman.
Okay, so for smaller, more remote refuges already with only one full-time employee, do you think there may be a risk of publicizing at the local level or social media, shining a spotlight or flying under the radar? Pros and cons. And this is from Friends of St. Vincent.
Well, you're right. There are pros and cons to that. I think if you have, is your St. Vincent, is your member of Congress the woman named like Kat something? I was just at Cedar Keys and I can't remember if that district goes up around the Panhandle or not.
No,
I
we're actually in the Tallahassee area, so we're up at the northern part. So it's Neil Dunn.
Neil Dunn. Okay, I don't know him.
Okay.
I can look into it. I think that my gut tells me it's still good to shine a light on this. You're down to one staff. It could be that by shining a light on it, you lose that staffer. But I think that it's more likely that you get your member of Congress to care about what's in their backyard. Um, if you lose, I mean, what can one staffer do? Two, like, and I'm seeing that around the refuge system as well. What can one person do? They can do some stuff, but I think my gut tells me that you should stand up for your refuge. I will look into it a little bit more about that member of Congress in particular. Does he not believe in public lands? I don't know. So I'm happy to look into it a little bit more about some of these more rural places. But and St. Vincent, do you have hunt programs there at all?
Yeah, we do. And I think what you said about really emphasizing the things that could be lost, like the hunts. We have a annual sandbar deer hunt. I think we are the only land, public or private, in the US at this point where people can hunt sandbar. So we get a lot of people, that aren't even local that come to that. And then we have two other hunts, one in the fall and one in the early winter time. So that's probably going to be our biggest connection to the local community.
I would use that as an example of something that is, I mean, also, how is that one person going to oversee that hunt? I don't know if they've done it in the past, but if you lose.
Yeah, we're in a refuge complex with St. Mark's, which has additional staff that support during hunts, but it's volunteers as well. So it's it's going to be interesting.
You might also see if you've got some, everybody here, if you have some local sportsmen in your organizations, in your communities, or individuals in your friends group. If you have conservative members of Congress, I would talk to those organizations and see if they would be willing to talk to your members of Congress with you or separately. But this will impact them as well. And I will say, I've worked really closely with hook and bullet groups, is what I call them, for many, many years. Ducks Unlimited, Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, Safari Club. I mean, there's so many, and they are very concerned, but they aren't saying anything right now. They're really worried too. Think about it, Ducks Unlimited gets a ton of money through grants to do wetland restoration. So a lot of these NGOs are also very concerned about how they will be impacted. And it's frustrating. It's very frustrating to not have them be vocal right now. But if they'd be willing to do things behind the scenes, I'll take it. That will work too. I will say that, we were advocating for millions of dollars for hurricanes Helene, Milton, and whatever the third one was. Recently for damages to refuges, not just from those hurricanes, but also to Neil Smith from the derecho over the summer. And a lot of groups would not lobby with us. They would not put their names on something. So it was just Corfa, the Refuge Association, and Defenders of Wildlife. Those are the only organizations that would publicly do something. And many groups wouldn't do anything anyway. There was one group that behind the scenes did stuff, and that I want to call them out is the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. And they put phone calls to their senators in Tennessee and Florida, North Carolina, to help get that funding for the refuge system. So there are some partners that care about the refuge system. They just might do it in a more quiet way. So I get some of these strategic questions about whether we should be quiet or not. But I think right now, being quiet is not the answer. I think that if we are quiet, we are going to get steamrolled and refuges are going to lose even more. I just don't think it's going to be helpful right now. I would love to think that we could just fly underneath the radar. I don't think we're going to. I think that, frankly, DOGE with AI is going to find places without a lot of public support and just those are the easiest places to go. So we have to make sure that they are not an easy target.
Bonnie asks, any large conservation nonprofits gearing up to try and acquire public lands that go up for sale? And should we be reaching out to them?
Wouldn't be bad to reach out to your local community. I mean, there are land trusts at the local level, and then there are also very large land trusts, obviously, like Trust for Public Land, the Conservation Fund, the Nature Conservancy, who do amazing work, who have worked to acquire so many lands in the refuge system. So if you've got something like that going, I would definitely reach out to the bigger land trust and your local land trusts. I know, you know, some of these lands that come up for sale, they won't come again. And some of the landowners who want to sell don't have the ability to wait either. They could have family issues, health issues. There's lots of reasons that people sell their land. So I would reach out to your local land trust and see. They're not going to be able to acquire everything, but they may be able to hold out long enough. And the land trust will, and at the national level, will be doing their jobs. Trust me, they will be lobbying Congress to make sure that these funds are not frozen. These are dollars promised to the American people in return for allowing oil and gas drilling off our coasts. So they're going to be really vocal about it if indeed we see like the process slowing down dramatically.
Okay, from Charles, at the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, construction recently began on a new visitor center. In addition to firings, do we need to be concerned about losing funds for infrastructure?
Good question. Yeah, absolutely. I think, of course. I think if your construction's already started, maybe you'd be a little bit safer. If it's been obligated, a little safer. But if construction hasn't gone that far, I think that this government is looking for any way to slash budgets. So if it means that it's a half-constructed building that never is finished, fine. I mean, you got to look at it from their point of view. Okay, great. So we'll just stop construction in the middle of it, and we never continue. That means that we never have the maintenance of a building. I don't think it's necessarily just going to move forward. I think we all have to be squeaky wheels. It depends on how far it's gone, and I just don't know. I haven't talked to Keith in a while. Keith Ramos is your project leader, great guy. So, I mean, I'm happy to chat with him a little bit about that. I don't know. Construction is a different line item in the appropriations bill. It has its own budget line, and the Fish and Wildlife Service is not a lot. You know, it's like maybe $15–20 million a year of construction across the system. And it's not just bricks and mortar. It's also like large scale restoration programs are also in the construction budget. But I think anything that they can rescind or pull back is on the table. Again, keep going back to what I said at the very beginning of this. This is about shrinking the federal government, period, by any means necessary. By any means necessary. So if there's anything out there, you may have to fight for the projects in your community. And so you may need to fight for that visitor center to keep it construction going. Absolutely. Everything's on the table. The only thing not on the table at the moment is law enforcement, fire, veterans, and people who respond to natural emergencies or respond to emergencies.
Okay, is it possible that the refuges could be instructed to abrogate their relationships with their friends groups? In which case, how should friends groups be prepared to reconfigure legally?
I don't know. Someone from Corpo want to take that one?
And Ken, maybe you can help out with this one. No, I know those agreements can be terminated, but I thought they needed to be terminated with cause. So,
No, they can be terminated in 60 days without notice. I mean, without cause. So we have, out here, attempted to protect our assets so they don't fall under the escheat clause of it. Also earlier, there was some indication, you indicated that there were some concern about how you could raise money and what you might be able to use it for. You could change the concept of what you're raising the money for. For instance, rather than raising the money to pay some let-go staffer, you raise the money to have the Friends complete some jobs that are now being done or were being done by staff. And to the extent that the Refuge System will let the Friends groups do that. You know, they let us run visitor centers, they let us run other things. And I have heard from some of the refuge managers here that they might like some assistance around the office, helping with administration. They might like to have some projects done with replanting in some areas. And we might be able to raise some money and then hire some people on a part-time basis ourselves. I say less than 19 hours a week so they don't become full-time employees. And to have them go out and do some of the jobs that are now being lost in critical places because the staff's been let go. So there are a number of ways to do almost anything, but it requires to some degree concurrence by the staff themselves and the question whether they're allowed to deal with us. But with respect to your own assets and your position, you got that 60-day clause in the partnership agreement, and that doesn't mean group POW are finished because we're all 501c3s. We continue to exist, and we might be able to contract with the refuge to the extent that they'll do that, or just offer to provide some services in our existing format. And that's a question of what they need done and how much they're willing to work with you.
So Janelle asks, our project leader just told me that he has been requested to provide all MOUs, agreements, and so on for their existing partnerships. I worry about the implications of this request.
Well, oh, go ahead, Ken.
You know, they have the service come out with the records that we have to keep and share with them. That's always been a bone of contention. And when they came out with a template to deal with that, we may want to continue negotiating as a group as to the appropriateness of that, because most of our groups are not staffed where we can keep a lot of records on it. And they may be trying to drive you out by asking for records, but depends on what you do. If you're raising money on the refuge, they probably have a right to see everything goes with respect to what you're raising money for. If you're raising money off the refuge for, say, the preservation of the habitat as opposed to for the benefit of the refuge, it's nuanced. They may not be able to get to that or records with respect to it. So that might have to be fought at some point, but you want to keep those arguments open for yourself.
And what Ken is referring to, that under the Office of Inspector General's report that was done back in, I want to say 2020, it did say that Friends Group should be reporting to the service some basic information. That has been stuck in the Office of Management and Budget probably for the last year. And given the things that are going on, will that be reviewed and approved in some sort of timely basis? I tend to doubt it. But so in terms of Friends reporting to the service, like I said, the service was trying to make it very basic information so that it would not take Friends and, a whole bunch of time. And we were hopeful that it would, go through as something simple, but we don't know what the current status is other than it's held up. And Tom, I see that you have your hand up.
One more thing on the records. One of the reasons we've suggested they not ask for too much is they don't have the staff to review it. So it's make work. And it shifts the refuge makeup from biologists to accountants and bean counters. So that's it on that.
Yeah, thank you. The question I had sort of built upon what I put in the chat is just making sure that I understand so that I can also help advocate and help educate my local refuge complex about the area where Friends groups can help. And it has been our understanding or the interpretation that, for example, if there is a position that's on the org chart, that we're not able to underwrite a position that basically replicates that. So as an example, at our complex, our entire biology team has been removed through this action. We have no biologist on staff. So is there a way for us under the current structure to hire them as a contractor or some other capacity to maintain that work which was the other part of my question, do you anticipate that maybe that's the future? They're going to change the directives so that it does move towards privatized actions. Anyway, I'm more interested in the immediate nature of helping to advocate and educate locally to say, these are the areas where we understand a friends group can help with these types of expenses. And we're particularly concerned about how do we fill in staffing resources, and curious if you could provide any guidance on that.
Again, it's a question of what your manager, the refuge manager, will let you do on it. But right now, there are people providing services on refuges, such as Pacific Rim on both your refuge and on Oahu, that are doing certain tasks on board at the various refuges. And I'm anticipating that either the Friends Group or other 501c3s, perhaps even a subsidiary of a Friends Group, might be able to provide such services as are permitted by that refuge manager. And you may just happen to hire the people that got let go to perform that, but you're performing it as your corporation. You're not providing jobs for them just to keep them busy.
But Tom, you do have a great point, because according to policy, Fish and Wildlife Service policy, and Tom and Mark and Howard, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you cannot replace an employee with a volunteer.
Joan, that's right. That's the way the Fish and Wildlife Service policy is written. But I think what Ken is suggesting is that the work would be performed as a service rather than replacing a personnel with a personnel, and that would be like shoveling snow, providing the show shoveling service rather than the maintenance worker to do the snow shoveling. So I think you need to nuance this with the refuge manager.
We have found that about 1/3 of the volunteers can be trained to do adequate work.
So that we have other agreements where we are underwriting, for example, predator control efforts that are outsourced to a contract. And so it seems like there is some pathway for contracted work to replace the direct work of a Fish and Wildlife employee. It just became a lot more specific with the skill set of, for example, the lead biologist who is missing as of this action. And our hope is that, again, that we could bring that recommendation to our refuge complex and increase their comfort with us being able to say that that is an approved arrangement. We struggle with, I think, a very close adherence or interpretation of the policy, as you mentioned, Joan. And so that's what I've been struggling with, is trying to expand that and find room for new places to help.
And I like the way Ken and Tom have nuanced that. That's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we work with allied conservation groups in our state and nationally. We are working with them to use their advocacy mechanisms as well. Can you help get us good, solid data set about the history of budget and staff and staff cuts, like the couple of slides that you shared earlier? And someone kindly shared a link with some of that information. Desiree, anything further that you might know of?
So I am trying to update some fact sheets for our board to go to the Hill next week. I am trying to get updated information in back channels with the Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm not asking for anything through email. I'm trying to do it quietly so that these folks don't have a target on their head. So I am trying to get that updated information. This is information that normally the Fish and Wildlife Service would provide to us at a moment's notice. But it's just not the case right now. And they're being very careful also about how they pull data, because very soon DOJ will be at Interior looking for who is pulling data on what. So that's just the reality. But we will try to have updated information we'll have hopefully something to share next week for our board members. And we will share that with Corfa and get it out to friends as well.
Thank you. Here's a question for you, Eden. When will the recording be available? We have a board meeting on 2/20, and I'd love for all the members to see this before then.
Yeah, we'll hope to have it out by tomorrow, but it may be Thursday.
Thanks, Eden.
Yep.
And I've caught up, and I'm skimming through the rest of the messages. I apologize if I'm missing some. I'm looking for question marks, to be
Cheryl,
perfectly honest.
Cheryl, there's one question that I thought I would ask. It was something about protests. Like, should we do protests on National Wildlife, or at the doors of National Wildlife Refuges? I think it depends on how you do it. I think having a small demonstration with friends groups at the gates of a refuge and inviting the media to come so that you can talk about what it is. You're not talking about picketing the refuge. You are local concerned citizens who are very worried about the impacts to your refuge. And I would use it more than a protest. I would call it a demonstration to highlight the challenges facing your refuge. So, you know, I wouldn't necessarily, you could call it a protest. It depends on what you're doing, but I think it could be very effective. I think that you are citizens who are, you know, care about your resource in your community. And again, getting it out to the local media is really important. And getting the media there, the photos would be fantastic. So, and that's what you use then on social media, and you use it to generate more social amplification. You tag your member of Congress, you talk about it, because otherwise it just doesn't mean anything. It's just, so you have to make it relevant. So I think it actually could be really a powerful thing to do. And it doesn't need to be a ton of people. You know, it'd be great to have 10, 20 people. But that's who, you know, you guys are taking time out from your day to do something like that. And Ann Bell also had a question about the Marine National Monuments, suggestions to do social media. Eden and I need to chat about that. I think, so there is a large coalition to protect marine national monuments. And by the way, the reason this is important to everyone in the refuge system is in all of Friends across the country. While marine national monuments are largely in the Pacific, and there is one off the coast of Massachusetts, these are units of the National Wildlife Refuge System. All of them are also part of the National Wildlife Refuge System. So to me, if President Trump tries to shrink the marine national monuments, I don't know what that does to the refuge. I think they still remain in the refuge system. So that's a legal question. I need to talk to my legal nerds who deal with, you know, land acquisition. It could be that they, that'll be a lawsuit, by the way, for sure. But if it's not a national monument, it still will be a unit of the National Wildlife Refuge System. So you can't just take those pieces out of the refuge system, but we can think, and I see Wayne on here and others that work on the Marine National Monuments. We'll talk to the folks in the coalition. And again, we had a conversation last week preparing for some potential action this week. So we'll try to think about it soon. There's a lot coming at us, right? I mean, it's just every minute there's another thing, and we can't do it all. But luckily, there are great partners in the Pacific monument space, or in the Marine National Monument space.
Totally
Mark,
understand.
do you want to come up?
Sorry,
Mark, do you want to come? Mark, do you want to come off mute and
Yes.
ask your question?
When I worked for the federal government some years ago on environmental issues, we had enough money to support the states and locals when they suddenly ran out of money, with the idea that when we didn't have the money, they would come forth again. And right now we're doing the same thing in Maryland. Without the federal funds, this is a chance for state and locals to provide the funding, with the understanding that they will be able to stop doing it 4 years from now when Trump is gone and Biden-like person is back.
I mean, I think it's important for groups to try to help their refuge in any way they can right now. My concern is that well, number one, states don't really have the money to take over national wildlife refuges. And if states don't,
Well, we found they often did have enough money during this emergency. They actually did.
It could be that they find money for certain things. That could be, but a lot of groups just don't have that. By the way, Mark, I love that you are just eating Nutella out of a jar. That is my favorite thing ever right now. Love it. This is exactly what I feel right now. I'm going to go after this call. I'm going to go get my jar of Nutella, maybe a jar of peanut butter as well, and I'm going for it.
Okay, I realize we're running way over time, but there were so many great questions, and I apologize again if I've skipped over yours. I'm just looking for question marks as I scroll down. I've still got 30 more messages I haven't seen yet. But Bonnie Ford asked a question regarding the potential government shutdown. Can we still set up meetings with representatives and senators if that happens?
Sorry, say that again. I'm sorry.
If the government shuts down, is it still possible to meet with representatives and senators?
Yes,
Usually.
that's a constitutional right to petition government.
Yeah, they usually are still working. So more than likely. And remember, I would try to get those meetings before March 14th. That is the government shutdown. So I would try to have those meetings beforehand. But if indeed it goes into a government shutdown, I think you should, raise your voices loud and clear again. The truth is every member of Congress is sort of scared of government shutdown. So, I don't think it will last long. It could last a long time. I don't know, but they have to meet with you. They will be working. They've got to try to find a solution.
Here's a question from Tana. Is it worthwhile to appeal to nearby tribes to seek co-management opportunities?
I don't know where this administration is going to go on co-management with Indigenous people. The last administration, for sure, it was a high priority, and I think that there are opportunities there. It depends on what that means. I think it means different things to different people, and it hasn't been super well defined, we'll just say. But if there are opportunities, it may be something worth exploring. It's just it hasn't. There's been examples around the public lands, but it's also there's a reason that the refuge system exists, and there's a reason that Fish and Wildlife Service employees run the refuge system. And I think we need to talk about why those things are valuable and not just ceding the argument that, oh, other people can just take this up. Friends groups can do all the work. The state can do it. The tribes can do it. There is a reason that Fish and Wildlife Service employees exist, and they do valuable work. So although we all, we exist as friends groups of the Refuge Association to stand up for the system and the land, we also stand up for the staff because they're the people who manage those lands. And I think we want to be very careful about just ceding the argument that the people don't matter, because they do. And there's a reason that we have them. And these are not jobs that can just be taken over by anyone. And I think we want to be really careful about that. Otherwise, why not turn it over to a corporation? Let's let, Dick's Sporting Good run, half the refuges in the country. What could go wrong? I like Dick's Sporting Goods, by the way. REI, Patagonia. I'm a happy shopper to all of them.
Hey, Desiree.
I'm sorry. Can we go back to the protest question again? We need to be really careful about how we answer that. As a former refuge manager, I can tell you that it creates some real sensitive issues. You have to have a permit, a special use permit, to demonstrate on a National Wildlife Refuge. If you can do it just off of the land, then that permit is no longer required. But if you're going to do it on a refuge, you need to be careful with that.
Thank you, Howard. That's great to know. And I think the person who asked it did say, you know, off the refuge or at the gates of the refuge, but thank you for that, for pointing that out. Do you think, I'm just going to ask you and other service folks could chime in, do you think there could be blowback to that local refuge staff?
I think in this environment, that is always possible. But the, you know, it's a very fine rope you're walking when you have a protest. You know, people have the right to protest, but at the same time, it's got to be safe. It's got to be managed. So you put your refuge manager in a very precarious position when you do that.
And actually, we did receive some guidance last year with the Get Out the Vote campaign with regards to that, Howard. You know, that this is freedom of speech, but you need to be super careful. It can only be, you need a special use. It needs to be done in a designated area. There were quite a few guidelines that we received that, Desiree, I'll be glad to forward them on to you.
Yeah, refuges have to provide a free speech area. I had that happen when I was a refuge manager years ago. I like Howard, I think the danger is that when we see protests, we think it's against the refuge. And this is about, Desiree explained it well, that we need to make sure the messaging needs to be clear. It's about what's happening to the refuge. We're not protesting the refuge or the refuge staff. So I would get a reporter out to make sure they hear what the real message is, and that we're not angry with the manager or staff or anything about the refuge. We're concerned about what may be its future.
Thanks, Mark. Good point.
Okay, are there any lawsuits of any kind under discussion or even possible?
I know of, you know, many lawsuits from federal employees. I don't know of them from Interior. You know, I've just heard about them on the news like the rest of you, from, you know, Department of Justice or other employees. So I haven't heard anything from Interior yet. I don't know, Mark, Howard, other Jan, anyone hear anything from Fish and Wildlife Service folks? So not yet. I don't know. I know people are saying that it's illegal firings of probationary folks. I don't know that that's true because they are a term that, I mean, it's probationary is a term for a reason. So I just don't know. I don't know enough about that side at all. Okay. My guess is it's going to be hard to that you would reinstate people. I think it would be hard. And that to somehow prove that it's not legal to fire probationary people. I mean, a lot of people got the same email. Your job is not in the public interest, you know, something along that line. And by the way, I also have a hard stop at a couple minutes before the hour.
Okay, all right, and we're almost there. Would appreciate action suggestions to cast out via social media for advocating for not repealing national marine monuments, for example.
Oh, that's the one that for Anne, we talked about that one a little bit. So I think that, you know, Ian and I need to chat with our coalition and see if we can get some better messaging out about that. So coming soon. And I hope that all refuges would stand up for the marine monuments as part of the refuge system.
Sorry, I was busy scrolling instead of listening.
That's okay.
Okay, I've gotten to the bottom of the message list. If there aren't any hands up, I think we need to call it quits so that you can get off. You've already given us an extra hour of your time. Thank you so much.
This is it's so important, Cheryl and Corfa, everything that you guys, friends, everything that you guys are doing, it matters. It matters so much. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep giving your refuge staff the support they need, you know, just letting them know that you're there for them, you know, bring them cookies and hugs and let them know that they are valued federal employees and that, you know, if you can help the people who were fired, if that means as you as individuals, helping them find a way going forward, whether that's finding a job, housing, whatever it is, and make sure that those people, as you talk to those people who were fired, make sure that they know, again, that they have a home with the Fish and Wildlife Service Retirees Association, and that we would love to hear their stories. If they email us, they can be anonymous or not. But the more we can get out these stories to tell what really, there's so many compelling stories about the people who were fired. And again, there's going to be more. And so we need to make sure that people understand what is at stake when you let this many people go and when you're going to let more go, the media and Congress. So thank you, Corfa, Cheryl, and thank all of you Friends members for doing what you're doing. It means a lot.
Thank you, Desiree. We always learn so much whenever we have an opportunity to listen to you talk about what's happening. And that's important for us all to know. Thank you, everybody, for participating. And we'll see you again next month.